So, welcome everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. My name is Amali, I'm the Chief Exec of Code First Girls. Code First Girls, if you haven't come across us before, we are a mission-led company. And we have one focus, and that's to get more women into tech. We've been running for about 3 years. We actually spun out of another company called Entrepreneur First, so you might have come across them before. They're a pre-seed accelerator. They take bright people, usually from technical backgrounds, allow them to kind of meet other bright people, form companies, launch companies, mentor them, support them, take an equity share, fairly classic kind of accelerator model. And I think one of their sort of recent successes was Magic Pony, which sold to Twitter. I think it was like 150 million or something, lots of zeros. Anyway, very exciting. We were spun out of them in 2014. And Code First Girls really started almost like a feeder program to Entrepreneur First. And the idea was that if you were a woman who was thinking about setting up a company through EF and you didn't have a tech background, that you could actually do what was originally just a couple of introduction to web development courses and then feel a little bit more comfortable about whether it was building your own products, working with technical co-founders, or actually working with external suppliers. So something to make you feel like you just felt a bit more connected to the tech sphere. And as mentioned, we just have one mission, which makes my life both incredibly easy and incredibly difficult. How do we do this? A few different things. One is we teach people how to code. So we actually run paid coding courses, we run free coding courses, and we do those. The free courses are with young women, so roughly between the ages of, let's say, 18 to 23. And the paid coding courses we run are either for professional women, so women who are non-developer backgrounds, but who are maybe more established in their careers, so doctors, lawyers, handbag designers, you name it, we've kind of done it. As well as courses actually for men and women. So it can be crash courses for senior management teams, it can be evening courses for junior staff, and lots of different kind of arrangements in between. We also do events. So we actually have a sort of a community of sort of 6,000 plus women now who sort of come and join for our events. And it's really around just helping people to understand what is it like to work in tech? What is it like to work in fintech or food tech or fashion tech? What is it like to work at Twitter or Bank of America or, lots of different types of companies? And when it comes to our attendees, whilst we focus on supporting women who come and join as the attendees, the people who speak to them and the people who share more about their journeys, we have men, we have women, we have people who are non-binary, and it's really around saying, look, this is the world that you're thinking about going into. Let's bring a bit of humanity to you, right? Let's bring a bit of what are the people behind these companies, these projects, these types of things, and let you understand a little bit more about them. And then the last thing that we do is we actually help companies. And when we're talking about that mission to help get more women into tech, it's not just about helping the women who are considering their careers. It's also about helping companies to adjust to taking people from non-conventional backgrounds. So a lot of the companies that we work with, the early conversations where we started having, let's say, 2-3 years ago, they would turn around to us and go, yeah, we're hiring for a dev role. We're only willing to take people who have a computer science degree, and they come from these 4 unis. At which point we would usually sort of turn around and go, well, that's great, and I'm sure you have really great people coming from those organizations, but actually there's a whole wealth of other people who are coming from lots of non-conventional background, people who are switchers, people who have come from, different types of, arts and creative backgrounds, who are also incredibly creative people who build things, who are great problem solvers, and can kind of help to add to your company as well. Why do we do this? I'm an ex-quant researcher. I go and pull data sheets for fun and then do analytics on them, which is really exciting. But basically, I went and pulled the ONS data set, so Office for National Statistics. And sadly, this is the picture in the UK. So if you look at the people who are registered as being in the tech and telco industry, women who are engineers and software developers only make up 3.9% of that, and that's down from about 10% in 2007. And actually looking at those numbers, it's not that actually the number of women who are participating is dropping, it's just that the actual pool is getting better, but the number of women isn't. So as a proportion of the total number of people being involved, those numbers are shrinking and shrinking. And when we look at, I guess, the landscape, and this is all of our kind of industries, tech is big. In 2017, turnover in digital and tech in the UK was £170 billion. Now, that's up 22% in the last 5 years alone. And when we talk about the types of companies who are actually part of this sort of digital economy, they are generally more likely to be fast growth companies than the rest of the UK. So lots of really, interesting companies growing quickly, driving lots of money into our economy. And that's reflected in very much the types of salaries that we pay as well. So the average salary in tech and digital is around 51k, which compares to, I think that's 44% more than the national average. So well-paid, in-demand jobs that really aren't going filled, because when they actually speak to companies, they also find out that what are you worried about? What's stopping your business from growing? The number one answer they're giving is talent. And you probably all see this kind of in your landscape as well, around trying to hire good people, trying to help, all of the companies who are developing their tech teams can be a real challenge. If we look at that job landscape a little more closely, the UK has apparently 1.64 million digital and tech jobs. More than 50% of those, as I mentioned, were saying that they're struggling to recruit tech talent. And actually, they took a look at some of the jobs platforms. So they looked at a platform called Burning Glass, and there's slightly old data now, but in 2015 alone, in the first 9 months, they had 1 million job vacancies posted online relating to tech and digital. So the scale of this is intense. And if we're thinking about, how are we actually feeding that pipeline, how are we looking at that going forwards, we're all looking down the barrel of Brexit. Myself included, I'm sure most of you have friends who might come from the EU who are now considering where do they kind of go with things if you aren't yourselves. And also when we're talking about, let's say, university pipelines, so again, looking at the data sets and my habits of running numbers, UCAS data showed that last year in 2017, there were 26,600 people who did a computer science degree. Of those, 3,775 were women. So that's less than 14%. So I'm thinking, we've probably got, maybe 10, 20 people in this room. If each of you are from a different company, and just with 20 companies, how do you then try and get that little micro share of less than 4,000 women a year if you're saying that you're spending money, time, and resource to trying to hire gender diverse tech talent? So the numbers don't stack up. And this is why, I guess, for us, Code First Girls, we started thinking about what can we do to address this and how can we help people to upskill. A little snapshot of what we have done so far. We're a super small company. There are 7 of us. There are 7 of us now. There were 5 of us about 6 months ago. But between that 5 and now 7, we have taught over 6,000 young women how to code for free across the country. We've delivered over £3 million worth of free coding education. This semester, actually, these numbers are already out of date. So beginning of this year, which was our spring semester, we delivered 51 courses across the UK, from Aberdeen, Southampton, Dublin, Belfast, Bristol, Bath, Birmingham, Leeds, Manchester, Nottingham, all over the place. And so this semester alone, that was 1,500 young women. This coming semester for the autumn, we'll be increasing that even further. That's going to go up to 90 courses across the UK, which means that by the end of this year, we'll be teaching somewhere in the region of 5,500 women how to code for free. Which, when I mentioned those UCAS numbers before, if you're talking about universities teaching less than 4,000, the fact that as a 7-person not-for-profit, we'll be teaching more women how to code per year than go through the British higher education system, I find that bonkers. And fingers crossed that kind of just explains a little bit of the scale of what we're trying to do. This is how we have been increasing. I joined at Code First Girls just after they had spun out of EF, so I joined as their first chief exec. It has been a busy few years. So you can see here, this was where I kind of started at that, beginning of 2015, end of 2014. We were teaching somewhere in the region of 350. As I mentioned, this semester, actually, which isn't even showing on this because we just run the data this week, that's gone to about 1,500 women per semester. We will be continuing to grow. And we're doing that primarily through our 2020 campaign, and I'll explain a little bit more about that later. But if you're thinking about, who are the kinds of people who come through our community, I did want to just share, I guess, a couple of stories of some of the people who we work with and who have come through as our students. So this is Grace. Grace was one of our early cohort in 2014. She was studying. She had never done coding before. She came to us. And she's a very bright young woman. She was studying at Cambridge. And she really enjoyed coding, and she learnt, and she went and learnt more. She joined a robotics company after she graduated, and she's recently actually, she got a job at NASA as a robotics intern, and then actually gave up that job because she got a full scholarship to MIT. If only all of us could be so lucky. So, those are the kind of things as far as kind of, her journey and coming through. We have people like Dolly. So again, Dolly comes from an advertising background. So she had never done any coding before. She came to Code First Girls. She did our courses. She got involved in the community. And she really loved it. So she actually went on to a company called Freeformers. She worked as a digital strategist. And she's actually just left there now recently because she's going to become a software developer. So again, for Dolly's journey, and thinking about that journey, we're talking about 1.5 years, 2 years from having no coding experience whatsoever to getting to that point where you're comfortable taking on a role as a junior dev in a company and actually building products and services. And then lastly, there's Malike. So there's actually a picture I took when I met Malike probably about 1.5 years ago. So Malike came up to me after one of our events. We'd just run an event looking at fintech. And she came up and she said, Amali, we've never met before, but I just wanted to introduce myself. My name's Malike. I did your course at level 39. And I really loved it. I'd never done any coding before. I'd never really considered tech, so she was studying economics at the time. But she really got into it, to the point where she actually came up to me and said, so I got into it, I got really excited, so I decided to write a book, right? So she went off and actually wrote a book looking at fintech in Istanbul and looking at the tech ecosystem. And you can actually, the bit.ly just here is a copy of her book. She's actually just published her second version of the book now, and she's actually working for a fintech startup, which is looking at how you make investments. So really, really amazing stories. And, what always blows me away is the short amount of time that people can make those changes. And when people are saying, I only want to take someone who's coming from this type of background, or I only want someone with this type of profile, these are the people that you're missing out on. These are the people who are bright, who are motivated, who have looked out in the world and said, this is something which I think might be exciting, but you're turning around and turning them away because you think you know who you want to hire, rather than really just trying to understand who they are, what their backgrounds are, and what they're capable of. And then lastly, I guess I just wanted to wrap up with, you're all here as, whether it's, people working in tech, digital, devs, engineers, product managers, whatever you're doing. What can you do? Every single one of you in this room can do something, if you want to do something. And the 3 things for us which we've found from the community members, from the developers who work with us, and when I talk about, for example, our community courses, all of those community courses are taught by volunteers. So I have developers from companies from Nomura through to Twitter, through to Google, who come and help us to deliver those courses. Male and female, non-binary, everything in between. We've had trans people who are instructors as well. And it's all about just exposing people to different parts of the tech ecosystem and helping them to understand what that's about. So the 3 things which really made a difference to us: this idea of community within the tech industry. The other thing is thinking about networks and how you actually leverage those networks. And then the last thing was around continued learning. And this wasn't just continued learning for people as individuals, but for companies as well. So how do you continue to grow and think about how your operations are, your structures, how you manage people? If we look at the community part of things, you can absolutely come and join us as part of our 2020 campaign. So as mentioned, we've just set this goal, which launched in December, to teach 20,000 young women how to code by the end of 2020. So for us, that's a really amazing goal. We're well on our way to kind of do that, and we are being supported by so many amazing people who are helping us to achieve that. Number 1 is actually all the developers and engineers who actually join us as volunteer instructors, and they also join us as speakers. They come and join as mentors, but also the companies. So we've got a number of partner companies who've joined us, and we're offering a sort of a hybrid CSR service offer. So they join us, they help us to fund the courses, we train their younger staff, and actually there's also, for the headline sponsors, they get access to a really amazing community. We're building a kind of a LinkedIn for women in tech. By the end of 2020, there will be all those 20,000 women on there. So we're basically saying, if you're struggling to recruit junior tech talent and build your pipeline, here are 20,000 young women who are in one place, who have done a coding course and are wanting to develop their careers. The other thing is around how you interact with the wider community. Now, I think there's something quite special about the tech industry, which is I don't think any other industry has quite a culture of meetups and hacks and just getting people together to actually share ideas. This is just a snapshot actually from meetup.com, just talking about the numbers of meetings. And I think this was from 2016. they found that actually 180,000 individuals across the country have been in attendance as far as meetups. And that for our community is really important as well. So where you're actually going to these types of events, if you're speaking yourself or if you're just joining, if you see people who are newbies, if you're seeing people who are, maybe don't understand a lot, help them, support them, encourage them to come with you. If you've got juniors in your company who are, feeling a little bit nervous about joining these types of events. I rarely go to an event where people are unfriendly. But it's amazing what preconceptions people have about going to things like hacks, right? So don't underestimate that if you're an experienced professional, sometimes what you already know, you take them for granted as far as your comfort level around the industry, and just help people to get into those and support them when they go to those events as well. The other thing is just as far as companies. So we do advisory work on tech talent recruitment and retention. And this is really based on the idea that for a lot of the companies that we meet, and we meet hundreds of companies each year, very few of them actually are turning around and saying, we don't want diversity, we don't want inclusivity in our companies. Very few of them are kind of that side of things. But it is one of those things where if you want things to be different, you have to do things differently. And for a lot of companies, the types of operations, the processes, the way that they go about recruiting people, finding people, supporting people, just doesn't lend itself to inclusive hiring and inclusive support for people who are joining those companies as well. And this is more than gender. This is about different ethnic backgrounds. This is about different sexualities. This is about different ideas of hierarchy. Are you an introvert? Are you an extrovert? Do you work at home? Do you work flexibly? So all of these types of things play a part in creating that inclusive environment. And what we help companies to do is actually unpick those processes and identify, based on not only the companies that we meet, but quite literally the thousands of young women that we meet, why it is they're not applying for your jobs and why they're leaving your companies. And what are the different things you can do at those different stages to actually try and change that and change direction. And then the last thing is, if you haven't come across already, there are some great organizations out there who are supporting diversity and inclusivity in tech. Tech Talent Charter is one of them. That Code First Girls, we've been a founding member. It started about 3 years ago. And lots of really amazing companies who are supporting in that guise as well. This is about peer-to-peer support, company to company. So it's about saying, rather than us all starting from scratch, trying to figure this out on our own, let's share those experiences. Let's try and help each other, learn from each other's good and bad points. And that way we can actually just drive a greater change between that. So lots of interesting case studies and opportunities to meet people who are challenging those kinds of ideas. Please do check it out if you haven't done so already. And that is it. Thank you very much for your time.